Hey, it's Jang here from UltimateRC.com, and this is my review of the Axial AX10 Ridgecrest RTR. This is a 4-wheel drive, 1/10 scale rock crawler with 2.2-inch sized wheels. Like previous versions of the AX10 and all proper crawlers for that matter, this one has solid axles front and rear for that great flex in suspension articulation. However, although there are many original AX10 parts or compatible parts that have been recycled into the Ridgecrest, it's really more closely related to the newer Wraith. The front and rear axle assemblies are taken straight from the Wraith, as are the suspension links. The RTR links are all plastic, but they have great triangulation both top and bottom. Inboard, the lower links are mounted pretty close together on a new skid plate and transmission mount that's beveled up at the front and rear and has a very small footprint to reduce high centering. The chassis is a plastic tube frame setup with each side being one piece. The frame is actually symmetrical front to rear and left to right. They give you 3 options up top for shock mounting positions and also 3 positions to mount each of the upper links. These link mounts are actually bolted on, so I would expect to eventually see some aftermarket replacements available. The battery tray is at the rear and can easily hold a large hard case 7.4 volt LiPo pack. The ESC is called an AE2 and it's made by Castle Creations and can be programmed with a Castle Creations programming card or USB interface. This one runs brushed motors only. To the front of it you can see the water-resistant receiver box. The motor is a 20-turn sealed can non-rebuildable brushed unit, and the transmission has an adjustable slipper clutch, a gear cover, and a center locker. The AS3 servo has all metal gears and it's rated for 142 ounce-inches of torque at 6 volts. This servo is also known as the Bluebird BMS 820 DMG. As you can see, the steering links are all plastic, just like on the Wraith. Another set of Wraith spec components, the shocks. These have plastic threaded bodies and titanium nitride coated shafts. This wheel and tire combination is actually from... who am I kidding? These are from the Wraith too. The 2.2-inch wheels are not beadlocks, they have to be glued, and the tires are 5.5-inch diameter ripsaws. The tread pattern is very aggressive and spills over onto both sides, but the RTR rubber compound, though soft, isn't very sticky. For a radio, they do give you a 2.4 GHz unit, and this thing actually feels pretty good in the hands. Its functions are very limited and basic, giving you trims and reversing for both channels, plus steering dual rate. So how well does the AX10 Ridgecrest RTR crawl? The simple answer is pretty darn well for an RTR. But this is a review, and a simple answer just won't suffice. First off, the 4-link suspension geometry is very well sorted. It keeps the axles under control and they don't move left to right and steer the rear when the front articulates. The shock setup also feels pretty close to right. It doesn't allow too much flex, but if anything, I would like to see just a little bit more, especially up front. The steering angle is really good, maybe even too good at times, as you can see right here. The outside tire was turned so far that without dig, there was just no way to pull that front end along. That's mostly a symptom of the overly flexible composite steering links. Sometimes the servo will issue a command to the front wheels and the wheels will just say, nah, not right now, maybe later. Speaking of the servo isolating out the flexibility of the links, the servo itself is okay. Its speed is definitely sufficient, but the torque, it's kind of lacking. Over this rugged terrain, I was able to stall it out pretty regularly. The good news is that after a full pack of hard use, unlike the AS2 servo that came with the Wraith RTR that I tested, the AE3 was warm but not hot. This gave me confidence that even if it wasn't very strong, at least it would last a while. So what about the motor? Well, it actually has pretty decent torque for what it is for a little RTR sealed can thing, but it's definitely over-geared for crawling. Axial again tried to go for the rock racer style of performance out of the box. It's going to top out at about 11 miles per hour, just like the RTR Wraith. Pretty quick for a crawler, but abysmally slow by non-crawler standards. But to get even that speed with this pretty modest motor, they really had to sacrifice the low end. As a result, I ended up having to blip the throttle quite a bit, because the motor, like the servo, would just start to stall out. Now right there you saw just a little bit of an objective issue with the body. I'm not going to get into the subjective thing because some people like this body, some people hate it, but it does have a lot of front overhang, especially with that bumper detail that's added on. And that does take away from your approach angle, especially going downhill. The last thing I'll cover here is the tires. Like I said early on, the tread pattern is actually really nice and very aggressive, but the rubber compound, not so much. They're not terrible though. Hardcore crawlers would laugh at them and throw them in the garbage, but for folks who are new to the solid axle scene, they're more than good enough to get started. The foam inserts are a little bit harder than you normally want for crawlers, but if they weren't, the motor would stall out even more. I think it's a respectable compromise. After I had my fill of box stock driving, I brought the thing back to the workshop for some minimal retuning. First off, here you can see that I moved the battery tray to the front. It was really easy because the chassis side plates are completely symmetrical. I just had to basically move the things and use existing holes that are already there for screws, which left me just racking my brain over why Axial didn't set it up this way to begin with. Forward weight bias is always a good thing and always necessary for crawlers. The missing link here? The length of the servo wire. Bluebird servos have really short wires. I needed to add an extension cable to be able to reach the rear-mounted receiver box. For a cost of a couple bucks, I was able to put things the way they should have been in the first place. While I was in the shop, I also swapped out the 20-tooth pinion for a 15-tooth gear, and I threw on a better tire setup. These are some used Proline Interco Swamper TSLs. The rears are unweighted, but the fronts have 5 ounces of lead apiece. The net result of these simple and straightforward changes? Awesomeness. I knew the Ridgecrest had it in it, I just needed to unlock it. Everything was now better, except for the steering. That was a little bit worse, but everything else made up for it. This is a crawler. This is a very good crawler. I'm actually going to go out on a limb and say it's better than the Wraith. I liked the Wraith a lot. But the shorter wheelbase here and the really narrow and short center skid really makes the Ridgecrest a more capable vehicle, especially over real-world rock crawling terrain like this. The use of a mostly Lexan body, whether or not you like the look of it, also really helps to keep the center of gravity down low. Good stuff. Now, as far as durability and construction quality is concerned, this is the biggest problem that I had. That one little screw tended to back out on its own, connects the steering knuckle to the hub. I had the same problem with my Wraith. Self-tapping screws should never be used on stressed moving parts. I also noticed an odd hint of wear on the front stub axle inputs. As shown earlier, sometimes the outer wheel in a turn can be pushed too far, can actually steer too far. Here you can see one of the pins on the dog bone can actually come out of its slot. With a higher torque motor, you would probably either break that off or get it just locked up completely. This is one more good reason to look at shoring up the steering linkages if you get one of these. And by shoring up, I mean replacing with metal. So, summing things up, the Axial AX10 Ridgecrest RTR ain't too bad. It has its flaws, but it's definitely good for beginners. Experienced hobbyists looking to get a little bit more serious with crawling without getting into the competition realm would be well advised to get one of these, take out all the electronics, take off the wheels and tires before even running anything, sell all that off on eBay, and use the money towards better running gear that will make this a really great truck. The drivetrain is good. The suspension is good. The shocks may be plastic, but they're fine and they're very tunable. Overall, I'm very happy with this platform, and I know that it can only get better as you put more effort into tuning it up. So that about does it for this review. Thank you very much for watching. I hope that was useful information for you. If you want to see more of the raw driving footage of the AX10, both in its pure box stock forms as well as with this minor retune, you can find those on my channel with minimal editing. If you have any questions or comments about the AX10 Ridgecrest or other scalers and crawlers, try stopping by the RC Crawlers and Scalers forum at ultimaterc.com. I hope to see you there, and I'll talk to you again soon.